Anyuta by Anton Chekhov. In the cheapest room of a big block of furnished apartments, Stepan Klochkov, a medical student in his third year, was walking to and fro, zealously conning his anatomy. His mouth was dry and his forehead perspiring from the unceasing effort to learn it by heart. In the window, covered by patterns of frost, sat on a stool the girl who shared his room, Anyuta, a thin little brunette of 25, very pale, with mild grey eyes. Sitting with bent back, she was busy embroidering with red thread the collar of a man's shirt. She was working against time. The clock in the passage struck 2 drowsily, yet the little room had not been put to rights for the morning. Crumpled bedclothes, pillows thrown about, books, clothes, a big filthy slop pail filled with soap suds in which cigarette ends were swimming, and the litter on the floor. All seemed as though purposefully jumbled together in one confusion. "The right lung consists of 3 parts," Klochkov repeated. "Boundaries. Upper part on anterior wall of thorax reaches the 4th or 5th rib. On the lateral surface, the 4th rib. Behind to the spina scapulae." Klochkov raised his eyes to the ceiling, striving to visualize what he had just read. Unable to form a clear picture of it, he began feeling his upper ribs through his waistcoat. "These ribs are like the keys of a piano," he said. "One must familiarize oneself with them, somehow, if one is not to get muddled over them. One must study them in the skeleton and the living body. I say, Anyuta, let me pick them out." Anyuta put down her sewing, took off her blouse, and straightened herself up. Klochkov sat down facing her, frowned, and began counting her ribs. One can't feel the 1st rib. It's behind the shoulder blade. This must be the 2nd rib. Yes, this is the 3rd. This is the 4th. Yes. Why are you wriggling? Your fingers are cold. Come, it won't kill you. Don't twist about. That must be the 3rd rib, then. This is the 4th. You look such a skinny thing, and yet one can hardly feel your ribs. That's the 2nd. That's the 3rd. Oh, this is muddling, and one can't see it clearly. I must draw it. Where's my crayon? Klochkov took his crayon and drew on Anyuta's chest several parallel lines corresponding with the ribs. "First rate, that's all straightforward. Well, now I can sound you. Stand up." Anyuta stood up and raised her chin. Klochkov began sounding her, and was so absorbed in this occupation that he did not notice how Anyuta's lips, nose, and fingers turned blue with cold. Anyuta shivered and was afraid the student, noticing it, would leave off drawing and sounding her, and then perhaps might fail in his exam. "Now it's all clear," said Klochkov when he had finished. "You sit like that and don't rub off the crayon, and meanwhile I'll learn up a little more." And the student began walking to and fro, repeating to himself. Anyuta, with black stripes across her chest, looking as though she had been tattooed, sat thinking, huddled up and shivering with cold. She said very little, as a rule. She was always silent, thinking and thinking. In the 6 or 7 years of her wanderings from one furnished room to another, she had known 5 students like Klochkov. Now they had all finished their studies, had gone out into the world, and of course, like respectable people, had long ago forgotten her. One of them was living in Paris. two were doctors, the fourth was an artist, and the fifth was said to be already a professor. Klotchkov was the sixth. Soon he too would finish his studies and go out into the world. There was a fine future before him, no doubt, and Klotchkov probably would become a great man. But the present was anything but bright. Klotchkov had no tobacco and no tea, and there were only 4 lumps of sugar left. She must make haste and finish her embroidery, take it to the woman who had ordered it, and with 1/4 rubles she would get for it buy tea and tobacco. "Can I come in?" asked a voice at the door. Anyuta quickly threw a woolen shawl over her shoulders. Fetisov, the artist, walked in. "I've come to ask you a favour," he began, addressing Klotchkov, and glaring like a wild beast from under the long locks that hung over his brow. "Do me a favour. Lend me your young lady just for a couple of hours. I'm painting a picture, you see, and I can't get on without a model." "Oh, with pleasure," Klotchkov agreed. "Go along, Anyuta." "The things I've had to put up," Anyuta murmured softly. "Rubbish. The man's asking you for the sake of art, and not for any sort of nonsense. Why not help him if you can?" Anyuta began dressing. "And what are you painting?" asked Klotchkov. "Psyche. It's a fine subject, but it won't go somehow. I have to keep painting from different models. Yesterday I was painting one with blue legs. 'Why are your legs blue?' I asked her. 'It's my stockings stained them,' she said. 'And you're still grinding. Lucky fellow, you have patience. Medicine's a job one can't get on with without grinding.' Excuse me, Klotchkov, but you do live like a pig. It's awful the way you live." "How do you mean? I can't help it. I only get 12 rubles a month from my father, and it's hard to live decently on that." Yes, said the artist, frowning with an air of disgust. "But still, you might live better. An educated man is in duty bound to have taste, isn't he? And goodness knows what it's like here. The bed not made, the slops, the dirt, yesterday's porridge in the plates." "That's true," said the student in confusion. "But Anyuta has had no time today to tidy up. She's been busy all the while." When Anyuta and the artist had gone out, Klotchkov lay down on the sofa and began learning, lying down. Then he accidentally dropped asleep, and waking up an hour later, propped his head up on his fists and sank into gloomy reflection. He recalled the artist's words that an educated man was in duty bound to have taste, and his surroundings actually struck him now as loathsome and revolting. He saw, as it was, in his mind's eye, his own future, when he would see his patients in his consulting room, drink tea in a large dining room in the company of his wife, a real lady. And now that slop pail in which the cigarette ends were swimming looked incredibly disgusting. Anyuta too rose before his imagination, a plain, slovenly, pitiful figure, and he made up his mind to part with her at once, at all costs. When on coming back from the artist, she took off her coat, he got up and said to her seriously, "Look here, my good girl, sit down and listen. We must part. The fact is, I don't want to live with you any longer." Anyuta had come back from the artist's worn out and exhausted. Standing so long as a model had made her face look thin and sunken, and her chin sharper than ever. She said nothing in answer to the student's words. Only her lips began to tremble. "You know we should have to part sooner or later anyway," said the student. "You're a nice good girl, and not a fool. You'll understand." Anyuta put on her coat again, in silence, wrapped up her embroidery in paper, gathered together her needles and thread. She found the screw of paper with the 4 lumps of sugar in the window, and laid it on the table by the books. "That's your sugar," she said softly, and turned away to conceal her tears. "Well, why are you crying?" asked Klotchkov. He walked about the room in confusion and said, "You are a strange girl, really. Why, you know we shall have to part. We can't stay together forever." She had gathered together all her belongings and turned to say goodbye to him, and he felt sorry for her. "Shall I let her stay on here another week?" he thought. "She really may as well stay, and I'll tell her to go in a week." And vexed at his own weakness, he shouted to her roughly, "Come, why are you standing there? If you're going, go. And if you don't want to, take off your coat and stay. You can stay." Anyuta took off her coat, silently, stealthily, then blew her nose and also stealthily, sighed, and noiselessly returned to her invariable position on her stool by the window. The student drew his textbook to him and began pacing from corner to corner. "The right lung consists of 3 parts," he repeated. "The upper part, on the anterior wall of thorax, reaches the 4th or 5th rib." In the passage, someone shouted at the top of his voice, "Grigory, the samovar!" So, that's the end of the story. Now, I don't normally provide commentary, but I think that this short story by Anton Chekhov deserves it. It really is a conversation starter. For example, why does Anyuta go from person to person, offering herself in such a way as though she was a hoover or a broomstick, and she's in one home and she cleans that house, and one can come along and borrow her like that? Why does she allow herself to be treated this way? And also the false, for me, there was the false feelings of superiority that both the artist and the medical student had towards her. She was not worthy of the lives that they were heading to, but was, good enough to use in that moment in a sort of inhumane way. Where, interestingly, the lumps of sugar for me were the key. That, she was sewing because he couldn't afford to feed himself, basically. She did everything. So who was really looking after whom? The story starts off looking like she goes from person to person, to have shelter, to be looked after. But in actual fact, it just shows that economically, financially, she's filling the gaps for this medical student. And yet the vanity in both those, the artist and the medical student, in not even addressing her, but really dressing her down about the filth in the room, about he was asking for her but not really asking her permission, talking to the medical student, and yet criticizing her, again not giving her the respect of criticizing her to her face, and then the medical student, sort of wavering on his ethical response to her. But even in the way he says stay, and it does say that he says stay because he feels bad that she's sad. But I don't know, I think that the reality is somewhere in the back of his mind, he knows that he needs her. And how it ends with the announcement of Grigory Samovar is interesting. There are so many ideas about why that Anton Chekhov ends on that. But for me personally, my personal view, when I read this story, and I read it over and over again, and I'm sharing it with you here on this channel on Audiobooks TV, my thing is that they are all like parasites around her, and this Grigory Samovar, is announcing himself. He's there for Anyuta. They all need Anyuta, but won't give her the respect of admitting that to her or treating her well enough for her to know. It's almost as if I'd really love for this conversation to take place in the comment section below. Please do like this video. It's so important for the channel.
so important to my motivation. As you know, I haven't been on the channel for a while. I really was trying to search myself about why I'm doing this. I really can't give it up. I'm so attached to the small family of Audiobooks TV subscribers that, you know, I just want to keep producing for you as much as I can. Obviously, I do have to work, so I won't be bringing books as frequently, but I really love for us to communicate in between times of upload. Do put your comments in the section below. Listen to the story. Let me know, what is your take on this story? What do you feel about how Anyuta allows herself to be used? And what do you think about the people who feel entitled to use her? It's an interesting story. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, bye.